Hello guys, today is March 25th, 2020, and this is the Japan coronavirus update. So as of my checking at 8:30 a.m. yesterday, there were 1,202 cases, and then the day before that, on March 23rd, there were 1,133 cases, which means that the number of confirmed infections has risen to 69 people in one day. That is the most seen so far for Japan. Here in Tokyo, and each case says that Tokyo has seen the most increase of cases on March 24th. That is mirrored, I assume, with the rest of the country. Similarly, the only dates that have seen similar numbers of increase are between March 9th and March 14th, and you can find that information on this website here. So, the elephant in the room, the Olympics. The Prime Minister last night said that they were going to postpone it and they're going to hold the Olympics no later than the summer of 2021. That's great. They finally had some sense to do this. I do find it weird that this decision does parallel the increased number of infections on the same day. But whatever. It's too early to tell what's going to happen with that. If Japan sees a jump in cases correlated by an increase of testing that should happen from this point on, I think it's safe to say that I was right about the Olympics being a major factor in their testing protocols. Whether you believe that or not, that's up to you, but that's just my opinion. Japan faces untraceable virus cluster fears. Japan's lower rate of domestic infections and deaths compared to other nations has some in the country feeling optimistic, but health professionals are warning that a larger scale outbreak could be just around the corner. That could be true, and probably is, because we have seen it in other countries that we thought had it under control. A lot of those countries in Southeast Asia, they were seeing an increase of cases recently, even though a lot of us thought that they were doing okay in the early days. That goes for the rest of the world too, but only time will tell. Japan should not disregard that, and they should keep an open mind, knowing that, they might face an increase of cases from this point on, as we've seen with all these other countries. I will tell you why I think we will see a surge of cases. For one reason, the lax restrictions that Japan has. So over here, we see some of the countries that will be denied entry. So that includes places like Hubei province, some areas in Europe that seem to be getting hit hard, like northern Italy. But for example, you could come from like Beijing, China or something, and you wouldn't be denied entry. We all know that it's been established that the whole country is facing an outbreak. But these restrictions only seem to focus on specific areas rather than like the country as a whole. So like Italy has a major epidemic all over the place, all over the country, but they are not banning people entirely from Italy. So that's what I'm trying to say, that cases will be imported therefore because of that. This seems pointless in my perspective. Here it shows that if you come from listed above certain countries, you are asked to self-isolate, but we've seen that that's not being enforced. We've seen that people are really ignorant at this time. So if someone doesn't think they're sick, or if isolating for 2 weeks seems inconvenient to them, they're probably not going to do it. That's just how people seem to be moving right now. Fox News reports why Japan seems to have avoided mass outbreak. Japan relied on a strategy of quickly identifying clusters of new cases and then imposing containment measures to prevent a larger outbreak. Bruce Klinger, a specialist in Korean and Japanese affairs as a senior research fellow for Northeast Asia at Heritage Foundation, told Fox News. With relatively low numbers of COVID cases in Japan, there has been less international focus on the government's response than on South Korea's energetic testing program. While Seoul's actions have been described as a gold standard for the world, Japan adopted a less energetic, critics would assert, lackadaisical, I don't know what that word is, testing and closure strategy. That's a really good point, and you can see it everywhere. No one's really talking about Japan in this aspect, obviously, because from the outside things do seem okay. The low numbers here do not concern the media, obviously, because it doesn't fit their narrative, unfortunately. No media is reporting on Japan's strategy on combating this crisis. The only subject that comes out for international concern in the media is the Olympics. Japan does have an incentive to make it appear as if there's low cases. They're trying to convince the world that the Olympics are good to go, well up until yesterday when they postponed it. But I think you will see an increase of cases and an increase of stricter measures now that the Olympics are going to be out of the picture for the time being. In sharp contrast to the likes of China and South Korea, which put people in heavy-handed isolation measures, and the case of the latter said about mass testing, Japan did not mandate a shelter-in-place. It did take some crucial steps, such as closing schools, staggering commute times on public transport during peak hour times, and limiting crowd sizes at public gatherings and some entertainment venues. It has not shut down its nation, with most of its clubs and restaurants still busy and bustling. I like how this addresses that despite closing schools and therefore maybe offsetting people commuting publicly a little bit, social distancing we're seeing the rest of the world do is not emerging here. Even right now up until this point. Like, people in the United States are told, like, if you don't need to go out, if you absolutely don't have to, then don't. But in Japan, there's just people doing normal life as usual. It could be that Japan, while on the front lines of the outbreak, was exposed at an early stage and might have dodged a bullet by focusing on preventing the virus from entering the country. But the government also made a conscious decision not to test widely, and that might lead to another surge in coronavirus cases. So Japan's main airports, which have stayed open, took basic precautions such as thermal scanning international passengers for elevated temperatures as they walked by, having new arrivals pledged to self-isolate for 14 days. Although the protocol was not enforced, a notable departure from much of the coronavirus-ravaged nation. In the early weeks, the government even donated funds to its Asian neighbor to assist their efforts to combat the coronavirus. So this is also saying that Japan had a concerted effort not to test widely, which doesn't make sense. That will eventually and statistically account for increasing cases that I'm sure we are going to see in the near future. Like I said before, self-isolation for people coming into countries are not being enforced. This virus has a long incubation period, so I don't see the point of airports doing the thermal scanner thingy. That proved ineffective anyways, because now we have a fucking pandemic. However, some critics and medical experts in the certain weeks have voiced suspicion at the low numbers, indicating that Tokyo may have been underreporting the real figures in hopes of still going ahead with the now postponed 2020 Olympic Games. Others have chalked it up to a fundamental lack of testing, underscoring that Japan in the initial weeks endured a short supply of test kits, with China its only route of supply. Whether you want to believe that the Olympics have been a motive to their undertesting has to be a result of that, or either the authorities not wanting to test for whatever reason, or a logistical issue. Either way, I do think that they need to increase wider testing protocols. That's further supported here. This article suggests that Japan is confident that they'll be having a decrease of cases. This article here says that they do have the capacity to test 7,500 people per day, but they go on to further to say, quote, "We don't see a need to use all of our testing capacity just because we have it. Neither do we think it's necessary to test people just because they're worried." First of all, 7,500 tests a day for a country like Japan is little to nothing compared to what capabilities other countries are able to come up with right now. Secondly, I really think it's irresponsible to come out and say that they don't see the necessity to either. So then I have a question. Why is that? Why is there a low urgency to test people? Shouldn't people be given the option to test? Maybe not random people, but reasonable people with reasonable symptoms should be able to get tested for it, especially if they test negative for the flu or something like that. And plus, if you increase testing, you can possibly catch an asymptomatic case and then mitigate the spread through wider transparent testing, or policy of a no questions asked testing like South Korea did. If they're not testing widely, there will be much more disease than officially notified, especially if social distancing is not being used. This is very true. Japan needs to relook at what they're doing. They could be lucky so far with the low case count, but that will not be the case if we continue the same efforts that are being pushed right now. A lot of recent cases have been imported too, so that is something to consider. In conclusion, I think they do need to expand their restrictions expand it to countries rather than just specific places of hard-hit countries. And expand their testing to milder cases, and then that can further mitigate the spread and cause more devastation in the future. Because right now, I don't think 7,500 tests a day for nationwide is a lot at all. Whatever the reason, economic, political, logistical, they need to step up their testing capability. No matter what, I assure you we'll find an increasing number of cases soon, if not in a few weeks. But I am glad that the Olympics are being postponed, because that's been in the picture. It'll be out of the picture now, so I think Japan will have a better incentive to test wider and catch cases that are being unable to trace and mitigate the spread by testing. So that's all I have for today's coronavirus update. As always, make sure you subscribe and share. You can comment your thoughts so we can discuss the issue, and see you next time.